Well, welcome back. You're watching The World This Week on France 24, and we're discussing the top news stories of the past 7 days. Just to remind you of my guest tonight, Anne Bagameri is the senior editor at the International Herald Tribune. Stefan de Vries is the Paris correspondent for RTL4. Dave Clark is the deputy bureau chief at AFP, and Judah Grunstein is editor-in-chief at the World Politics Review. Thanks again to you all for being with us tonight. Now, we're moving on to our next story then, and this week saw the first election in a post-revolution Arab state. Tunisia's vote was hailed as free and fair by international observers, but the result caused some concern both there and abroad because the Islamist party Ennahda won the most votes. So let's talk a bit about that then. Stefan, starting with you. Should we be concerned that the Islamists are coming to power in Arab countries?
I don't think so.
Tell us more.
Well, it's very easy. I mean, these are Islamic countries, so we shouldn't be surprised that there are Islamic forces in politics who are winning a lot of votes. And we in the West, we don't like Islamists because we immediately think that they're terrorists. But basically, Ennahda, the party that won in Tunisia, is a moderate conservative Islamic party, which could be compared to the Christian Democrats in Europe. Of course, it's a new party. We don't know really what they're going to do, but I think for the time being, we should give the benefit of the doubt, and it's perfectly acceptable that they won these elections, so nothing to worry about.
Dave Clark, Rashid Ghannouchi, the party leader, says, don't compare us to the Taliban or the regime in Saudi Arabia. We're not like that. But there are fears, aren't there, that more conservative elements are being hidden within the party and that they will come to the fore later on.
Well, there is a concern that a lot of the leaders obviously were in exile because of the previous regime persecuted them. And these leaders who've been in exile have been in contact with a wide range of Islamists around the world, and have also been living in more liberal societies. And they are people that are confident we can talk to, and that they are not a danger to this very new, very young democracy. And let's not forget to celebrate that a free and fair vote with very little violence was held so soon after a revolution. Within Tunisia, though, there are small numbers of people attached to this movement and in a parallel Salafist movement who have become radicalized by the persecution they suffered under Ben Ali and by the radicalization of Islamism across the Middle East. It's something you have to keep an eye on. But we can't demand democracy in the Arab world and then get frightened when the most popular people win the most votes. I think it would be more of a concern if some new way had been found to exclude them, and that would be guaranteed to send them towards more radical solutions.
Judah Grunstein, were you surprised by the results in Tunisia?
Not necessarily, not having followed it extremely closely, but it seemed like what pretty much everyone was expecting. I just wanted to point out what's interesting about the comparison he made. He said, don't compare us to Saudi Arabia. And what that does is it really points out the fact that, in fact, the West doesn't really have a problem with pretty hardcore Islamic theocracies. It has a problem with hardcore Islamic theocracies that don't align with the West. I think, too, though, that there's also sort of a time lag. We're still thinking in terms of 1979 and Islamic revolutions. This is an Islamic election. There's a huge difference. And I think that when you look at this region and you look at this region as a democratic region, hopefully. Obviously, there's going to be some changes in terms of their foreign policy alignment and their foreign policy orientation. That said, the world has changed a lot since 1979. And all of these countries, all of the revolutions or the uprisings, if they're not yet revolutions, in Tunisia and Egypt, were driven by young people who want more connection with the world, not less connection. And I think that this fear of how things might turn out is more a sort of fear of what we have to offer than anything else. I think that that Europe and the United States have plenty to offer to these countries in terms of connectivity, in terms of investment, in terms of integrating them into the global economy. And so I don't see any reason why a priori there should be some sort of rejection of the West. Obviously, there's a historical resentment. But again, from what I've seen and from what I've read, these people seem to be pretty savvy about what they're doing and about the world as it exists today. A lot of the people who were elected today were in exile in France. So I don't see, I think it's alarmist to think that that this is necessarily bad news or frightening news.
But it is uncharted territory, isn't it? This is the first election we've had since the Arab Spring, so obviously people are watching very closely what happens, and it's the end of that trade-off, isn't it? We're in the end of an era where in the West, we've been supporting leaders who kept these parties oppressed and made them illegal and said, look, we'll take care of any Islamist threats. So it's inevitable, isn't it, that they now take part in politics?
Well, just to underline something that Dave said, I mean, democracy is messy. You don't know what you're going to get, but you have to respect the process. And I think that's probably, if I were in the head of Barack Obama, that's what I would be thinking now. Is free and fair elections were held. The result may not be what we expected, or it may be what we expected. We may be a little concerned about the way it's going to go in the future. There are elements that can't be controlled by Western powers. But after all, that's one of the elements that brought about the Arab Spring, the desire of the young populations of these countries for self-determination. How can you argue against that? So a certain amount of institutional discomfort, I think, is inevitable now. But I have a feeling the Western powers will live with it.
One parallel we could look at is our relations with Turkey, which they've become more assertive since the AKP has become more confident in its Islamic roots. Mm-hmm. There's been a kind of readjustment in the way we have to deal with Turkey. You have to show a lot more respect and take it on board. Mm-hmm. And they also have shown leadership in the region, and obviously they have a much more tense relationship now with Israel than they used to. But there hasn't been a breakdown in relations with Turkey. Turkey's still a NATO ally. We still work closely with Turkey on a lot of dossier. And I think...
Has that something that perhaps has kept it out of the European Union? Because when you look at economic growth in Turkey and compare it to
Sarkozy has kept it out of the European Union.
Well,
that's true.
And the other thing, just building on what both Anne and Dave said, for years in the West, the question has been, are these Islamist parties playing a double game? For years, the Muslim Brotherhood has renounced violence and has called for being allowed into Egyptian elections, and the Mubarak regime historically said we can't let them win power because if they do, they'll become like Iran.
They also called for a ban on women or Christians taking part in politics, something they haven't renounced.
One of the things that I was going to say is that essentially, I don't think that the Islamist parties or a hardline faction of them have a lot to offer to the populations. The one area where there should be a lot of concern is how the rights of women in those societies. Tunisia seems to have come out a lot better. They started as the most advanced and most liberal Muslim and Arab country for women, and in terms of the way in which the elections were organized, women seem to have retained, I think it's a 50%. The system seemed to guarantee
there'll be more women in the Tunisian parliament than anywhere else.
I think it was a 1-1-1. I think every other candidate on political lists had to be women.
Something we could possibly do within some European.
In Egypt, though, there has been quite a bit of backsliding and regression in terms of how many women will be represented.
Just going to show that every country is different.
Mm-hmm. And whatever their policies in terms of religion, what they're really going to have to deliver these new governments is jobs and economic growth.
And
that's what people want, isn't it?
He also says our priority is the economy and the society that will come later, but our priority is the economy, and he has promised to create 600,000 jobs for the Tunisian people. I am not sure if he will keep his promise, but that's of course political rhetoric. But he is focused on the economy, and all the parties in Tunisia are, and it's a country with incredible opportunities, and we should not forget that these societies are very conservative. In our opinion, in our eyes, because they live like we were living in Europe in the 1950s or 60s. So to us, it's not an image that we like, but it's a different culture. But we tend to project our own culture and ideas onto these countries, which is completely unfair, of course. And it's very comprehensive that these people vote for a conservative party.
All right, well, let's move on to another country which has undergone a huge change recently. I'm talking, of course, about Libya, where the NATO mission is officially drawing to a close on Monday. Warplanes bombed over 6,000 targets during the 7-month operation, including, of course, that strike that led to the death of the dictator Muammar Gaddafi himself. So, Dave Clark, it's mission accomplished. Good day for NATO.
Well, that's a great phrase, isn't it? Mission accomplished. You always feel fearful when you hear that phrase these days for some reason. As far as NATO's concerned, yes, they're packing up. There are some loose ends. Saif al-Gaddafi has not yet handed himself in, although he appears to have been making an attempt to avoid the fate that his brother and his father received. Hopefully, within a few months, Libya will be moving towards what we were just discussing about in Egypt and Tunisia, like elections have been held. I think there are a lot of challenges remaining in Libya. I'm not convinced that the NTC is a united body. There just seemed to be some suggestion that Muammar Gaddafi was shot, at least in part, because there was a disagreement about which of the militias should take him into custody. And then there was disagreement about whether his body should be autopsied, where it should be buried. I mean, disagreement is messy, it's part of democracy, but at the moment they don't seem to have institutions in place that can deal with, they don't have a national army, for example, that can deal with this kind of process. We'll see how it goes.
It was quite extraordinary, wasn't it, Stefan, the reaction in the West to Gaddafi's death? I mean, it was never a stated aim of NATO to have Gaddafi
Not
killed
an
or
official
removed,
stated
but
aim.
obviously it was desirable in terms of building a new state. Did you find that interesting, the way people were so shocked and
of course, but
horrified about the way he was killed?
we never know the official agenda. I mean, apparently French helicopters were involved in the attack on the convoy, but they say they didn't know that Muammar Gaddafi was in the convoy. So, who to believe? You know, it's of course a very messy war. So, yeah, the outcome might be, well, what a lot of Western leaders decided. But then again, they also received him with a lot of egards here in France and in England and in other European countries only 2 or 3 years ago. So it's very hypocritical and very opportunistic.
I think from a human perspective, no matter how horrible someone is, a leader is, and it's very hard to sort of humanize that when they're in power in front of TV screens and things like that. I think from a human perspective, it's horrifying to see someone completely vulnerable at the mercy of what amounts to just a
Revenge.
a mob seeking revenge. And so I think that human reaction is perfectly understandable.
And then to see his body photographed for several days afterwards was
it was like a trophy killing. I mean, there was really, I think, every reason to be
Everyone
horrified.
carries a cell phone with a camera in it now. We can't assassinate foreign leaders and not expect to see the blood.
Well, the same thing happened when Saddam Hussein was hung and the images, but just addressing where Libya is right now. In terms of mission accomplished, for instance, this and no one's denying this. This is not the end. This is the very beginning. I mean, the last 6 months, 7 months was to try to get to this point. And what's more alarming to me is that, given what Europe is dealing with right now, given what the United States is dealing with right now in Afghanistan and in Iraq, given that no other really global powers have any interest or desire to step in. There's a huge security vacuum in Libya right now, where there's a huge amount of weapons, a huge amount of factions, no real consensus, and it's a country that for 40 years has been willfully and purposely destructured. So that there's really,
it has no institutions.
It's
it has
not like Tunisia. It's not like Egypt.
company.
It's not even like Iraq or
There's no civil
there's
society.
nothing. And so really at this point, this should have been where the European Union had some sort of civil military peacekeeping project through the United Nations, with hopefully some multilateral support from Qatar or other Arab countries. There were a couple hundred Qatari ground forces in Libya during the war, but it's a vacuum.
That might be a mistake, though. We've tried occupying countries before.
I'm not sure it can be a lighter footprint, and even if they don't wear uniforms, somewhere along the line there needs to be some sort of security backstop, because
like Kosovo.
Yeah, maybe even it's a delicate. It certainly is a delicate situation politically. You don't want Western military uniforms marching through the streets in Tripoli, but at the same time, you don't want a huge vacuum in a country where everyone's on edge. It's very regionally divided. There are factions in every region, It's
But
a recipe.
mandate-
It's a
the
recipe
mandate
for a
was to-
Somalia-like chaotic situation,
Right.
which is the
or
last
some
thing
people
they
are saying it's the next Yemen, because
Yemen,
of the tribal
Somalia.
nature
It
of
could
the
also
country.
be the next Dubai because it's an incredibly rich country,
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
and it has only 6 million people. So
Yeah.
it could
The
turn
question
out
is,
very
if,
well.
if there's a
Nice
vision to
beaches.
say, look,
Yeah.
there's enough of this
Roman
pie to
ruins.
go around, so let's
Yeah.
share it.
Yeah.
At the same time, those kind of resources sometimes end up incentivizing a grab for everything.
Of course,
So.
yeah.
Yeah.
But then maybe there are some things we can't do. We talk about how it could become like Somalia or like Yemen, but Afghanistan's had hundreds of thousands of Western troops for the past 10 years,
Right.
and it's still like Afghanistan.
Yeah. And
Maybe.
you also have
Maybe
to,
some things are beyond us. Maybe
And
if
the
Libyans
mandate,
can't sort it out, no one else
remember
can.
the mandate of the United Nations was to protect civilians from an onslaught by Muammar Gaddafi. That has been done, hasn't it?
Yes.
They didn't do anything to protect Muammar Gaddafi's human rights, but he did save a lot of lives in Benghazi, and it was a victory militarily for NATO and for the NTC forces. Let's not take that away from Mr. Sarkozy and Mr. Cameron, but
Who were there the day after Tripoli fell. Let's
they
not
really
forget.
were. Yes.
yeah.
Are you hopeful that Libya will be able to move forward in the future? And do you think a reconciliation is needed with between the different groups struggling to have power now? That's important, isn't it?
I wouldn't even presume to tell the Libyans how to govern their own country. It needs to be something that's decided by the Libyans. Having said that, you also need resources to help recapitalize a country, help to rebuild structures. Fortunately, Libyans have oil. That's the one thing you can
And
say
a lot
about
of
this.
foreign currencies.
Even with Afghanistan, there was the Bonn summit where there was the entire international community coming to help the country structure
Yeah.
some sort of political reconstruction, whether it works or not. True, maybe we're up against
So
the
maybe
limits of
that
what we can do.
happens now.
But that should be what's happening.
But the international community has an awful lot on its plate right
Awful
now.
lot.
Let me put it this way: if we could go back in time and the UN had this challenge again, do you think it should do the same thing again, or would it do something differently?
This was the first military intervention that I would actually advocated for, and I think it was a high risk, or rather, I think it was a high payoff, high potential payoff with low potential risk. I think that the United Nations did the right thing. I think that NATO did the right thing. I think that, especially in this kind of situation, you're arguing against a hypothetical. We don't know what would have happened in Benghazi had the West not acted. We might be sitting here now saying how many tens of thousands of people needed to die before the West actually did something. So it's a tough case to make. But I
China and
don't
Russia
think
sitting out on a vote in the Security Council, and they're not going to do that for Syria.
No.
It relied on a certain number
we'll
of things
see.
coming
Sometimes
together.
events
All
can
right.
build up and pressure can build up in ways that are unpredictable. I'm
All
not
right.
so sure that.
Gentlemen, I'm going to have to ask you to stop it there. I'm terribly sorry. We have
Take it
run out of
outside.
time. These debates are far too short. There's so much more to talk about. Just a quick thank you then, Anne Bagamary, Stefan de Vries, Dave Clark, and Judah Grinstein. Thank you very much indeed to you all for being with us. Thanks to you for watching, and I'll be back with you next week with another debate at the same time. But do stay tuned. Much more coming up right here on France 24.